Hi, my name is David Hammond. I'm doing this genealogical video of family members talking about random thoughts, um, starting with my mother, Dorothy Duhaime. My mother was born Dorothy Alice Duhaime in Natick, Massachusetts in 1925. She was born on Bacon Street in a white house on a sharp corner. I don't know the number of the house, but she was born in the house upstairs. And she was raised primarily in Natick. Went to the Natick school system. She lived in Wellesley as a teenager, and I think they lived in Wayland. These were all three towns that touched each other with Natick in the center. She was one of 12. Her mother was Lillian Thomas from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and her father was James H. Lamont, and he was born in Stewarton Village, Scotland, which is in southern Scotland, and he migrated or emigrated to the United States with his parents in 1888 at the age of 4. He came across was one of 10. Which is another story, a very interesting story, I find. Back to Dorothy. She was one of 12. She had 8 brothers and 3 sisters. Real quickly, her oldest brother was Wallace Lamont, and then she had Arthur Lamont, John Lamont, whom they called Jock, Marjorie Tasnary, they called her Midge, James Lamont Jr., Warren Lamont, Lillian Lamont, named after her mother, Leona, Arminio, Lillian became Robege, and then there was Thomas Lamont, Robert Montgomery Lamont, and the youngest was David William Lamont. Mom was a young mother during World War II. She married Fred Hammond Jr., and it was not Frederick, it was Fred, F-R-E-D, Irving Hammond Jr. He was a Natick boy, and the Hammonds go back several hundred years in Natick. They had 4 children, myself being the youngest. Was Frederick William Hammond was the oldest, born in 1944. Marjorie Lillian Hammond, born in 1945. James Robert Hammond, born in 1949. And as I said, I was born in 1956. Mom was married a few times. She only had children by her first husband, Fred. She did remarry. I have some step siblings, some nice, wonderful people. I have Dad did remarry after their divorce. They divorced in, I think, like 1957. I was probably 1. And Dad started another family in Connecticut, and he married a nice lady, Beatrice, who had children on her own, and then they had some children together. So I have some half-sisters who I've unfortunately don't see as much as I like, but they're really good people the times I have met them. I don't know too much about Mom's younger childhood. I know that she was raised in what was called the Great Depression, where you had to there was no butter, for example. You'd have to take some kind of oleo or some liquid and put yellow food color in it and call it butter. I don't know how true all that is. I know that you'll have to bear with me. I'm not used to this video thing, and I'm not dressed for it either. There was 12 of them. I don't know, and I guess there was a period of time where all 12 would have been home at once, which is really amazing. So there must have been a lot of sharing and hand-me-downs and babysitting for the older siblings and squabbles. It must not have been easy. But they laughed a lot. When they were older, when I knew them, they had their arguments, of course, but they laughed a lot. She loved her sisters. They were her friends and her sisters. Lots of laughter, lots of fooling around, lots of joking. She looked up to her brothers. She adored her brothers. She talked about her father a lot. James Lamont, who she said was in the Spanish-American War. He helped run a still during the Prohibition in Natick. She used to be a lookout for the gangsters or the feds up on Bacon Street with her brother Warren. Like I said, she married young. It was during World War II, and she had 3 brothers. Her 3 oldest brothers were in the war, fighting on the fronts. Wally, Arthur, and Jock. I know Arthur was, I think, in the Philippines. Saw some action. Actually, saw some close-up action. And Jock was in Europe. I don't know a lot about his details. I have heard that he was in the Battle of the Bulge and was missing in action. The famous telegram came to the house. My mother remembers my grandmother getting this telegram. Sorry to inform you, your son is missing in action. And turns out when he was missing in action, he had some personal combat with a German soldier and had to kill him hand to hand, which is he never talked about. He would never talk about it, but this is what I was told. So she has vivid memories of Pearl Harbor and how afraid they were, and the Japanese war. And because when you have 8 brothers, all you think about is your brothers going off to war. I can imagine. It must have been terrifying. I'm not sure where she met Fred. They both were from Natick. I think her brother Warren was a friend of Fred's. I think that's how they actually met, started dating and so forth. And she married, she married in 1943 to Fred Hammond, and she was 18. And then my brother Freddie was born in 44. Margie in 45, so she had a young family while the World War was going on. And she was living mostly with her mother, Lillian, and James, and there was brothers living there. And my father was in the war. He was in the Navy. He didn't see action. He was in the North Atlantic. There was some minesweepers he talked about, going AWOL. That's another story. I don't have a lot of information on that either, to tell you the truth. They had a tempestuous relationship. They tended to argue quite a bit, from what I understand. They had 3 children relatively quickly. Then there was a big space, about 8 years. And then there was me, which was kind of made me like a makeup baby, which didn't work because a year later they divorced. And I didn't see my father for several years. I didn't even know what he looked like until I was like 10. And then once we got back and he came back into our lives, we became close. I found out I'm a lot like him. My hands just like his. My neck now that I'm old. I look at my neck and I see my grandfather's neck, so that's not fun. Mom was, for the most of her young life, went by the nickname Dolly. Obviously, it might have been a derivative of Dorothy, I'm not sure, but they called her Dolly. She worked and raised children. She was a top waitress in restaurants in Framingham and Natick and Wellesley, and pretty much paid rent with her tips back then. You get 50-cent tip. She could make 10, 20, 30 bucks a night in tips, which doesn't sound much now in 2017 numbers, but back then, when rent was $60 a month. That was pretty good money. She was a top waitress, and she loved it. She was off and on through my childhood. She was a waitress, and then she had some odd jobs. She mostly worked. When I was young, she remarried a man by the name of John Jackson. It was John Jackson Jr. from Sherburne, and I considered him my father. I was little, and he was the stepfather. And his father was John Jackson Sr., who owned Jackson's store in Sherburne, Massachusetts, and I have fond memories of that. Again, it's a future story. They were married for several years. Again, tempestuous. Maybe my mother was the common denominator. I don't know. But that ended, and we were alone together for a while there, living in Natick. We moved quite a bit to Natick. And then she married a gentleman by the name of James Chaves, C-H-A-V-E-S. Jim Chaves was turns out was a really nice guy. I was coming into my 11, 12, 13s, and I was not a very disciplined child, let's say, and we had our problems. But it turned out he was a nice guy. But unfortunately, he died in 1970 at the age of 42, right in front of me and Jimmy, my brother Jimmy, on a Sunday morning. And Mom was alone for a little bit after that, and then she met and married Roland Duhaime. He was born in 1926 in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and they were together till the end of his life. In 2004, they were together many years, and it turned out he was the guy that essentially was my father in many ways. I learned to be a man, what a man was like. You know, he wasn't a well-educated man. He wasn't intellectual, but he was savvy and hard worker and dedicated to my mother, and one of my best friends, as it turns out. They were together for 35 or so years. Mom phased out of the restaurant business. My brother Jimmy died in a motor vehicle accident in 1973, drunk driving. And my mother lost a lot of her will, if you will. Not will to live, but there was no more going out with friends and having a few drinks or anything like that. It took a lot out of her to lose her son. And after that, she was married to Roland. Roland worked at General Motors. She did okay. And we moved a few times. I was more or less a stay-at-home guy. I was a late bloomer. I didn't get married till I was 46. Which worried my mother, believe me. Mom was well-liked, many friends, an avid bingo player. Drove all the time. Had a license since she was a young girl. Drove taxi in Sherburne for a bit. Always had a car. Always drove wherever she needed to go. Always was the designated driver for her bingo friends and her lady friends, whatever it took. And she had a car right up until the end of her life. I sold it, actually. She was a busy girl, a lot of friends, great sense of humor. There was always laughter, and she was good, kind-hearted. She had neighbors that had some disabilities when she lived on the elderly housing, and she would help them do things like wrap their Christmas gifts when they were just strangers. And she had friends across the hall and up the hall. A dedicated friend. Made people laugh. People miss her. She died. February 20th, 2014. She was turned out to be some type of a cancer, a rectal type cancer, possibly from some type of a surgery she had earlier. My sister and I never pursued it. We probably should have. We're not litigious types. It was quick. She was okay, and then wasn't feeling good, then they had the issues, and then 6 months. Within 6 months, she was gone. She was in a nursing home in Framingham, and that's where she passed. She was very angry because she didn't want to be there. She was very angry with us. It was heartbreaking. But that is, what can you do? She has a legacy. She has grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren while she was still alive. They called her Granks, Grammy, Nani, Nana, all kinds of things. There was all different names for her. I'm going to stop now. I'm going to see if this works or not. So, the date today is, what is the date today? I think it's October 2nd, 2017.